Normandy, July 1944. The rain had turned the French hedgerows into walls of mud and smoke. On the edge of a shattered village near Saint-Lô, a group of German panzer grenadiers laughed as they spotted movement across the field, a line of American M for Shermans crawling forward. Flying coffins, one of them muttered. To the Germans, the Sherman was the clumsy face of American armor, too tall, too soft, too slow to stand against their Panthers and Tigers. They aimed their 75mm gun and waited. Then, before the first shot landed, the Shermans vanished, not by magic, but by coordination. A dozen tanks split apart, each veering into cover in perfect sync. Within seconds, machine guns and 76mm cannons thundered from three directions. The German gunner froze, realizing they had been flanked. In less than a minute, the laughter stopped. Radios crackled in the Shermans, clear, rapid, confident. To the Germans, it felt impossible, tanks moving like a single mind. The war had just shown them what communication could do. Summer 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy had shattered the Atlantic Wall and thrown German defenses into disarray. After D-Day, the Americans and British fought to expand their beachheads, pushing inland through the Bocage country, a maze of hedgerows, sunken roads, and fortified villages. Each step was costly, and each engagement tested the limits of command, logistics, and battlefield coordination. For the Germans, the Normandy campaign was a desperate defense. Their armored divisions, once the spearheads of Blitzkrieg, were under strength, short on fuel, and scattered across multiple fronts. Panzer units such as the 2nd and 21st Panzer Divisions faced Americans who were learning quickly. The Germans relied heavily on the perception that their tanks were superior both in armor and firepower. The Panther and Tiger had thicker armor and heavier guns than the Sherman. In their minds, the Sherman was a soft, tall target, slow, underarmed, and vulnerable. This belief was reinforced by early encounters. American armor often retreated under fire or avoided head-on confrontations, which confirmed German assumptions. But the Sherman was not what it seemed. Behind its comparatively light armor and ugly silhouette lay technology and doctrine that few German units had fully appreciated: reliable communications, coordinated platoon tactics, and flexible combined arms support. The M for Sherman, standardized across U.S. armored divisions, was designed not for duels with Panthers, but for mobility, reliability, and teamwork. Its radios, often FMSC R508 sets for individual tanks and -506 Seychelles rupees command sets for leaders, allowed commanders to communicate instantly with other tanks and infantry units. This networked approach let small groups of Shermans operate as a single, cohesive force. Where the Germans saw isolated tanks, the Americans saw a moving, responsive system. By mid-July, American armored units had begun to exploit these strengths. During the breakout from Saint-Lô, they coordinated movements across open fields using radios to relay positions, adjust fire, and maneuver around enemy flanks. The Germans, used to relying on visual signals or sporadic radio contact, were frequently caught off guard. Tanks that seemed isolated were, in reality, part of a controlled, dynamic formation. Commanders like Brigadier General William H. Rupertus and Colonel Creighton Abrams emphasized rapid communication and flexibility. Each Sherman platoon had clear roles, but the radios enabled dynamic reassignment of targets and maneuvers on the fly. A single officer could coordinate a dozen tanks over a wide area, directing attacks and defensive movements almost instantly. For German crews, who often operated in smaller, poorly connected units, the effect was disorienting. The Germans were also struggling with their own logistical and communication challenges. Many Panzer IVs and Panthers were fitted with radios, but coverage was inconsistent. Some units lacked intercoms, others were restricted to short-range voice signals. Fuel shortages, repair delays, and battlefield damage further limited their operational cohesion. By contrast, Sherman units were supported by standardized procedures, maintenance protocols, and a steady flow of replacements. This meant that even when individual Shermans were knocked out, the system continued functioning. The combination of doctrine and technology created a dramatic mismatch. German crews laughed at the slow barrels lumbering toward them, confident in their superior firepower. Yet these Sherman crews could split, rejoin, flank, and cover each other in ways that seemed impossible, over open fields or through the hedgerows. A Sherman platoon could encircle an unsuspecting panzer, fire simultaneously from multiple angles, and withdraw with minimal casualties. This background set the stage for the moments that would stun the Germans. The laughter, the smug confidence, and the belief in the invincibility of German armor collided with American innovation. It was not brute strength alone that would win the battle, but communication, coordination, and the willingness to adapt. In this environment, the Germans would soon discover that the Sherman was more than a soft target. It was the spearhead of a system that could outthink, outmaneuver, and overwhelm them in seconds. The seeds of that revelation were sown in the breakout from Saint-Lô, and they would fully bloom in the rapid encirclements and coordinated attacks that followed. The Germans could mock the tank itself, but they had not yet grasped the invisible network behind it. The radios that made a dozen independent machines operate as one unstoppable unit. The moment the Germans realized this would come suddenly, painfully, and with irreversible consequences. While German crews focused on armor thickness and gun caliber, the Americans invested in communication technology and doctrine. The Emperor Sherman was a product of standardized mass production, but it was also equipped with what would become one of its deadliest advantages: radios. Nearly every Sherman carried an SCR-508 FM radio, allowing tank-to-tank voice communication within the platoon. Command tanks often added an SCR-506 set, enabling officers to monitor multiple nets and direct the movements of subordinate units. This meant that, while a Panther or Tiger might act in isolation, Sherman platoons could operate as a single, coordinated organism. These radios were simple yet reliable. They allowed real-time updates on enemy positions, synchronized advances, and rapid requests for artillery or air support. For German crews, who often relied on line-of-sight signals or short-range FUG radios with limited intercom functionality, this networked coordination was alien. While the FUG-5 and FUG-12 sets existed, coverage was inconsistent. Many German units lacked properly trained radio operators or the capacity to coordinate beyond small groups. The Sherman's communication system was not just technical, it was doctrinal. American armored tactics emphasized combined arms operations, exploiting mobility and firepower across infantry, artillery, and air support. Radios enabled Sherman crews to act with initiative while remaining synchronized. Orders could be updated mid-engagement, maneuvers altered on the fly, and units encircle or bypass enemies before the Germans realized what was happening. German intelligence had underestimated this advantage. Early encounters with Shermans suggested sluggish, poorly armored tanks easy to destroy. Panzer crews laughed at their low silhouette and thin armor, confident in the 75mm or 88mm gun superiority. Yet those early skirmishes rarely revealed the Sherman's systemic advantage. Rapid communication allowed Sherman units to mass fire, adjust targets, and flank opponents with terrifying efficiency. One isolated Sherman might be vulnerable, but a platoon operating under unified radio control was nearly unstoppable. The Sherman's technical specifications reinforced this doctrine. Powered by the Continental R975 radial engine, the tank could reach speeds sufficient to reposition under fire. Its 8.30 caliber Browning machine guns provided suppressive fire, covering advances or retreats. With drop tanks extending operational range, Sherman units could pursue German forces farther than the enemy expected, maintaining pressure on retreating units. German panzer crews, unfamiliar with this extended mobility combined with real-time coordination, often found themselves trapped or outmaneuvered. The psychological impact was equally significant. German tankers, accustomed to relying on visual cues and preplanned maneuvers, were stunned when Shermans seemed to anticipate their moves. Radio operators relayed positions, coordinated fire, and even issued warnings of flanking movements. From a distance, it appeared as if Sherman tanks acted with a collective intelligence, a single mind controlling multiple hulking machines. These technological and doctrinal advantages were not theoretical. During the breakout from Saint-Lô and subsequent operations, U.S. armored units used radios to encircle panzer elements, cut supply routes, and maintain contact with infantry and artillery. The Germans' underestimation became painfully clear in engagements where they believed they held the advantage, only to find themselves outflanked, pinned, and forced to surrender. What had been mockery became immediate shock. Laughter silenced by the invisible network of American communication. Even within German doctrine, lessons were inconsistent. Some experienced commanders recognized the importance of radios and attempted to emulate American coordination, but shortages of equipment, fuel, and trained operators limited effectiveness. The Shermans' radios gave U.S. forces a force multiplier. Small units acting decisively could achieve outcomes that German officers had assumed required larger numbers or heavier armor. By mid-1944, the battlefield reality had shifted. The Sherman was no longer just a mass-produced, soft tank. Its combination of reliable communications, tactical flexibility, and logistical endurance turned it into a weapon far greater than its armor or gun might suggest. To German crews, this was a revelation they would experience directly, and the results would be humiliating. The Germans had mocked the Sherman for its perceived weaknesses. But in practice, the tank's radios and doctrine made it a fast, coordinated, and deadly opponent. The stage was set for the moment when the Americans would use these advantages to surround, outmaneuver, and shatter German units in seconds, a moment that would leave panzer crews stunned and struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The German crews had confidence in their Panthers and Panzer IVs. Years of battlefield experience had taught them that a well-placed 75mm or 88mm shell could destroy almost any Allied tank. The Sherman, by contrast, seemed slow and under-armored. On July mornings near Saint-Lô, German tankers would smirk at the lumbering green hulks crossing the fields. They called them Ronsons after a cigarette lighter, joking that they always went up first time, but confidence has a fragility. As Sherman crews advanced, German gunners noticed something odd. The tanks were not moving independently. They seemed aware of one another's positions. Flanking maneuvers appeared coordinated, suppressive fire came from unexpected angles, and retreating Shermans seemed to anticipate counterattacks. One German commander later wrote in his war diary, "We aimed, we fired, yet the tanks shifted as if they were one machine. It was incomprehensible." This was not magic, but the result of radio coordination. Each Sherman was in constant communication, relaying positions, adjusting targets, and responding to enemy fire in real time. For the German crews, used to visually signaling and waiting for orders, it was bewildering and terrifying. The human effect of this coordination was immediate. Morale collapsed as crews realized their shots were often ineffective or misdirected, and flanking attacks arrived faster than any human calculation could manage. The laughter died, replaced by confusion and fear. In moments that would last only seconds, smugness turned to panic, and the battlefield psychology shifted decisively in favor of the Americans. American armor doctrine leveraged the Sherman's radios in ways that German officers did not fully anticipate. A single platoon of 4 to 5 Shermans could operate with a level of tactical synchronization unmatched by many German units. Each tank received updates not just from its commander, but from the intercom system connecting the crew, allowing instant adjustments to firing, movement, and engagement priorities. During the Saint-Lô breakout, these tactics were put into practice. Sherman platoons advanced along multiple axes, splitting into semi-independent units while maintaining constant contact. A German squad attempting to engage from a hedgerow would suddenly find itself under fire from tanks appearing seemingly out of nowhere. The combination of coordinated movement, overlapping fields of fire, and responsive maneuvering created the illusion of omniscient command. Radios also allowed Sherman units to integrate with infantry and artillery. If a German armored advance threatened a village, the Sherman platoon could call for nearby infantry support or an artillery strike within minutes. German units, lacking comparable coordination, were forced into reactive positions, often trapped in kill zones prepared by combined arms planning. This tactical advantage was not reliant on superior firepower but on information superiority. German crews had to react to movements they could not anticipate. Even veteran panzer grenadiers found themselves encircled in seconds by tanks they had assumed were isolated. The efficiency of American radio communication and its integration into battlefield tactics turned every engagement into a test of adaptability. A test. German units consistently failed. The consequence was clear. Tanks that had once been considered clumsy or expendable became instruments of precision warfare. Laughter and mockery could not protect crews from the lethal orchestration of Shermans acting as a cohesive, networked force. The human and tactical angles set the stage for the technological revelations to follow. The moment when German crews understood that the Shermans' radios were more than tools. They were the secret behind their sudden and inexplicable defeats. At first glance, the Shermans seemed ordinary, mass-produced, lightly armored, and armed with a medium 75mm gun. Its true strength, however, lay in an invisible system: the radios. Each Sherman carried an SCR-508 FM set, providing reliable voice communication within the platoon. Command tanks added the -506 Seychelles rupees, allowing the platoon leader to monitor multiple nets and relay instructions to both tanks and accompanying infantry. These radios transformed isolated machines into a single, responsive unit. When one tank spotted a German Panther attempting to flank, the commander could instantly notify every tank in the platoon. Maneuvers that would have taken minutes with visual signals now happened in seconds. German crews, accustomed to limited and often unreliable radio communications, could not grasp this level of coordination. Even the intercom system was revolutionary. Crew members could speak to each other without leaving their stations, enabling split-second decisions under fire. The Germans observed Shermans moving like a single organism, capable of flanking, encircling, and withdrawing while maintaining constant awareness of enemy positions. This invisible network turned the Sherman from a simple armored vehicle into a sophisticated instrument of battlefield control. The Americans understood that technology alone could not win battles. Doctrine was equally critical. Leaders like Colonel Creighton Abrams and General Bradley emphasized communication-driven maneuvers. Sherman commanders were trained to make decisions autonomously while remaining coordinated with their platoon and higher echelons. During engagements, command tanks relayed orders rapidly, adjusting positioning and fire priorities in real time. The radios allowed a single officer to direct dozens of tanks over a wide area. Tactical plans were flexible. They could change mid-battle without losing cohesion. The Germans, in contrast, often relied on preplanned maneuvers and slower, hierarchical decision-making. Leadership at the Sherman platoon level created an ecosystem of trust and initiative. Crew members knew their commander could see the bigger picture through radio nets while still empowering each tank to act. This combination of technological and human leadership created an operational tempo that German units struggled to match, often leading to rapid encirclements and collapse under pressure for German crews. Early encounters reinforced misconceptions. They assumed Shermans were easy targets, slow, soft, and poorly armed. Panzer crews mocked the Ronsons, joking that their shells would ignite them instantly. But every engagement with coordinated Shermans shattered these illusions. German reports frequently described panic and confusion. Tanks that seemed isolated would suddenly appear in multiple positions, firing from unexpected angles. Commanders could not understand how a small platoon could perform maneuvers they had assumed required an entire company. The radios turned ordinary Shermans into tactical phantoms, erasing the advantage the Germans believed their superior armor and firepower provided. The psychological impact was decisive. Laughter turned to disbelief, then to fear. Even seasoned panzer units hesitated, slowing their advances and abandoning aggressive maneuvers. The Sherman, underestimated at first glance, had become a symbol of the Americans' adaptability and technological foresight, a constant, inescapable presence on the battlefield. The human, tactical, technological leadership and enemy perspectives converged to reveal why German crews were stunned. The Shermans' radios and doctrine allow them to encircle and dominate in seconds. Normandy, July 25, 1944. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows near the village of Saint-Martin-de-Varevel. German Panther and Panzer for crews, still smug from early skirmishes, advanced cautiously along the sunken lanes. They believed the Sherman to be an easy adversary, slow, poorly armored, and lumbering. Confidence radiated from their positions. Meanwhile, a platoon of M for Shermans from the 4th Armored Division moved through the fog, engines low and quiet. Inside each tank, the crew communicated seamlessly over the SCR-508 intercom. The platoon commander, riding in a Sherman equipped with a -506 Seychelles rupees command set, monitored to net simultaneously, one for his own tanks and another connecting nearby infantry and artillery units. Each crew member knew their role, but the radios ensured they acted in perfect unison. As the first German tanks crested a hedgerow, the Shermans split. Half advanced to pin the enemy frontally, while the others flanked silently through a parallel lane. Seconds later, the Germans were under fire from 3 directions at once. Machine guns peppered the infantry protecting the tanks, while the 75mm cannons targeted the Panzer's thinner side armor. One German gunner, aiming at the lead Sherman, froze as his target vanished behind hedgerows, only to appear again on his flank. Radio chatter from the Shermans indicated a coordinated push, calling for the remaining tanks to maneuver and encircle. The Germans were now reacting to movements they could not anticipate. By the time the Germans realized the scope of the encirclement, several Shermans had already cut off their retreat routes. The radios had allowed U.S. forces to anticipate enemy positions and coordinate fire with precision, transforming a standard engagement into a small-scale encirclement. The German crew's earlier laughter was replaced by confusion and panic. In another sector near Falaise, a similar scene unfolded. German armor had taken positions overlooking a strategic crossroads, confident in their ability to delay American advances. Sherman units approached under cover of hedgerows and artillery smoke. Using voice nets, the platoon commander redirected tanks mid-movement, adjusting for enemy positions and terrain obstacles. Within moments, the Germans found themselves surrounded from multiple sides. The speed of coordination was staggering. Whereas German units often relied on visual signals or sporadic radio orders, Sherman crews operated as a unified system. Flanking maneuvers that might have taken minutes occurred in seconds, and the Germans had no opportunity to reorganize. Tanks fired from overlapping arcs, infantry was suppressed, and escape routes were cut off before the enemy could respond. In the aftermath of these encounters, German reports were stark. Officers described the Americans as moving like a single machine and unrealistically coordinated. Laughter turned to horror. What had seemed slow and weak was now fast, flexible, and deadly. Shermans were no longer mere tanks. They were the central nodes of a living battlefield network. The combination of technological advantage, tactical doctrine, and effective leadership had reached a peak in these engagements. Radios provided instant situational awareness, intercoms allowed rapid crew response, and commanders coordinated across platoons and with supporting infantry. The result was a level of battlefield control that German units could neither predict nor counter in real time. The stage was now set for the final demonstration of this coordination, the moment when an entire German company would find itself surrounded, pinned, and decimated, a testament to the Sherman's hidden strength. Falaise, August 20th, 1944. The sun barely rose over the broken fields and narrow lanes when a German company of Panzer IVs and Panthers advanced toward what they assumed would be an easy target, a small American Sherman detachment holding the high ground. The Germans, still confident in their firepower, laughed at the Ronsons and prepared to annihilate them. Inside the lead Sherman, the commander spoke calmly into the SCR 506 radio. Positions of every Sherman in the platoon, as well as nearby infantry squads and artillery observers, were reported and confirmed. Orders flowed instantly. The Shermans split. Some maneuvered to engage head-on, drawing attention and fire, while others circled unseen, closing escape routes. German tankers fired their guns, scoring some hits, but the Shermans' speed and coordination allowed them to reposition almost immediately. Maintaining overlapping fields of fire. From the German perspective, the scene was surreal. Tanks appeared where none had been, firing from angles that should have been impossible. Crew members attempted to retreat, only to find Sherman tanks blocking their path from three sides simultaneously. The radios had enabled the Americans to act as a single organism, every movement preplanned yet flexible. Every target covered by multiple weapons. The German commander realized too late that his units were being surrounded. Requests for reinforcements went unanswered. German communication lines were overloaded and fragmented. The Shermans, however, maintained flawless coordination, calling for artillery strikes and infantry support as needed. Within minutes, the German company found itself trapped in a kill zone. One by one, tanks were disabled or captured. Laughter had been replaced by panic and disbelief. Eyewitness accounts from survivors highlight the psychological shock. One German tanker wrote, "We fired, we maneuvered, yet the Americans seemed everywhere at once. It was as if our tanks moved in slow motion while theirs acted with perfect unity." Another noted that even retreat was impossible, with Shermans cutting off avenues of escape using coordinated movements and terrain advantage. This was not a single isolated incident. Across Normandy, from hedgerows to open fields, Sherman platoons repeatedly exploited radio coordination to outmaneuver German units. In the Saint-Lô sector, German armor found itself encircled within minutes by seemingly invisible forces, while at Falaise, entire companies were neutralized before realizing the magnitude of the American advantage. The moment of realization for the Germans was acute. Tanks they had mocked as weak, slow, and expendable had revealed a hidden capability that rendered their own tactical superiority irrelevant. It was not armor or gun caliber that had won the day. It was networked coordination through radios, combined with flexible doctrine and decisive leadership. By evening, the battlefield was littered with abandoned German vehicles, and the survivors' morale had shattered. Commanders who had laughed at the Sherman's design were forced to admit that they had underestimated not just a tank, but an integrated system of technology, communication, and battlefield acumen. The Sherman, in seconds, had transformed from an object of ridicule into a symbol of American ingenuity and lethal efficiency. The stage was now set. The full consequences of these engagements, from destroyed German units to doctrinal shifts in both armies. The radios that had seemed insignificant before were now recognized as decisive instruments of war, shaping not only battles but the psychological landscape of armored combat in Europe. The battlefield after these engagements was stark and uncompromising. Panzer IVs and Panthers, once symbols of German armored supremacy, lay abandoned among shattered hedgerows and cratered fields. In Saint-Lô and Falaise, entire companies were neutralized within minutes, their crews either captured or forced to retreat under fire. American reports noted that coordinated Sherman platoons had achieved what previously would have required overwhelming numerical superiority. Rapid encirclement and suppression of enemy units. German officers documented the psychological toll. Laughter and mockery that had greeted the Shermans now gave way to confusion and panic. One veteran noted in his diary, "The Shermans moved with an unnatural precision, flanking us before we could respond. It was as if they knew our every move. The Germans, used to relying on line-of-sight signals or fragmented radio communication, were unable to counter the American system. Tactical initiative had shifted decisively. From a material perspective, the losses were measurable. Estimates suggest that in these engagements, dozens of German tanks were destroyed or captured, while Sherman casualties remained comparatively low. American forces used artillery and infantry integration, coordinated via radio, to maximize the efficiency of each tank's firepower. Every Sherman platoon acted not merely as individual tanks but as a networked combat system capable of overwhelming German formations quickly and decisively. The terrain amplified the effect. Hedgerows, villages, and sunken lanes, which had once offered German defenders protection, became traps when American radios guided flanking maneuvers. Shermans could navigate the complex landscape with real-time updates from commanders, while German units found themselves isolated and disoriented. The hedgerow country that had favored defensive tactics now favored the networked, coordinated Americans. The immediate aftermath was also tactical. German command began to reassess the Sherman threat. Reports circulated describing how a single Sherman platoon could coordinate with artillery and infantry to pin and destroy larger German units. While the Germans had underestimated the tank's armor and speed, it was the combination of technology and doctrine that had proven decisive. The notion that Shermans were merely soft targets was irrevocably shattered. Meanwhile, American armored units recognized the effectiveness of their approach. Commanders debriefed crews to refine radio coordination, intercom usage, and platoon maneuver tactics. The lessons learned in Saint-Lô and Falaise influenced later operations across northern France and into Belgium. Radio communication became not an auxiliary tool but the backbone of American armored doctrine, ensuring rapid exploitation of breakthroughs and swift coordination in multi-unit engagements. The human consequences were equally profound. German morale, shaken by repeated encounters with networked Shermans, declined. Soldiers who had mocked the slow barrels now faced fear and uncertainty on every battlefield. Their doctrine, which had long emphasized individual skill and armor superiority, struggled to adapt to the reality of coordinated, real-time American tactics. Across multiple engagements, the combination of speed, communication, and tactical flexibility had demonstrated that technological edge, when paired with disciplined doctrine, could outweigh superior armor. In short, these encounters marked a turning point. The Sherman had evolved in German eyes from a mockable vehicle into a symbol of lethal coordination. The radio, often overlooked in assessments of armor, proved decisive. Tanks acting as a single, communicative organism reshaped battlefield expectations and forced the Germans to reconsider the fundamentals of armored warfare. The long-term impact of the Sherman's radio coordination reverberated beyond individual battles. German high command faced a stark reality. The American Sherman was more than a tank. It was a system of networked warfare that could outmaneuver, outflank, and outthink even superior German armor. Reports from divisional headquarters in Normandy highlighted repeated failures caused not by firepower or crew skill, but by the inability to match American coordination. The operational consequences were immediate. German panzer divisions, already stretched thin, were forced into defensive postures. Encirclements and rapid assaults by Sherman platoons made aggressive maneuvers risky. Units that might once have counterattacked with confidence were now hesitant, aware that a single misstep could result in complete isolation and destruction. Commanders began to prioritize defensive consolidation over offensive initiative, reducing flexibility across the front. Doctrinal lessons also emerged. German armor training emphasized individual crew skill, mechanical superiority, and gun accuracy. These strengths were neutralized by American radio coordination, which allowed Sherman platoons to concentrate fire, execute rapid flanking maneuvers, and integrate artillery and infantry support in real time. The Germans faced an enemy whose tactical network rendered numerical and material advantages less decisive than previously assumed. Material attrition compounded the strategic problem. In Normandy alone, hundreds of German tanks were disabled or captured over weeks of coordinated Sherman assaults. Even where German crews survived, fuel shortages, broken communications, and the loss of mobility rendered these forces ineffective. Radio-enabled Sherman operations accelerated the collapse of German defensive lines, hastening the Allied advance toward Paris and the Seine. The psychological consequences were equally profound. German soldiers and officers now recognized that underestimating American ingenuity was costly. Tankers who had laughed at the Sherman were left with a lasting impression of its adaptability and lethality. Reports emphasized surprise and disbelief, reflecting the deep impact of facing an enemy who could see, coordinate, and strike as a unified whole. Confidence in superior armor alone was no longer sufficient. American forces, conversely, refined their doctrine based on these successes. Radio coordination became standard practice across armored divisions, ensuring that lessons from Normandy informed operations throughout northern France, Belgium, and eventually Germany itself. Commanders stressed the importance of communication, flexibility, and integration with combined arms elements, creating a force multiplier that allowed smaller units to achieve outsized effects. By the end of 1944. It was clear that Sherman platoons, while individually less formidable than German Panthers or Tigers, had gained a decisive edge through networked tactical coordination. German armor, despite superior firepower, could not replicate the same level of synchronized action. Each encounter reinforced the lesson: the Sherman's radios were more than equipment, they were the backbone of American armored warfare. In hindsight, these events highlighted a shift in modern combat philosophy. Mechanical superiority was no longer the sole determinant of success. Communication, coordination, and adaptive doctrine had become just as vital. For the Germans, this was a painful realization. For the Americans, it validated the strategic emphasis on standardized radios, flexible command structures, and combined arms training. The aftermath of these battles was decisive. German armor suffered not just physical losses, but a strategic and psychological blow that rippled through subsequent engagements. The Sherman, once underestimated, had proven that the integration of technology and doctrine could rewrite the rules of armored warfare. The story of the Sherman in Normandy is not one of sheer firepower or individual heroism alone. It is a story of foresight, coordination, and the quiet power of technology harnessed by disciplined doctrine. German crews had laughed at the M4, mocking its height, armor, and perceived slowness. Yet in the seconds it took for Sherman platoons to surround them, that laughter vanished, replaced by disbelief and fear. What the Germans had underestimated was invisible: the radios, the intercoms, and the doctrine that turned isolated vehicles into a single, intelligent organism on the battlefield. This was a lesson in the evolution of warfare itself. Machines alone do not win wars. Systems do. And in 1944, the Sherman demonstrated that communication and coordination could multiply the effectiveness of even seemingly modest equipment to devastating effect. The psychological dimension is equally profound. Armies are not simply collections of weapons and soldiers. They are networks of decisions, anticipation, and adaptability. The Americans understood this, integrating radios with leadership and tactical training to create an operational tempo the Germans could not match. In those moments near Saint-Lô and Falaise, the Sherman became more than a tank, it became a symbol of systemic ingenuity and adaptive power. Looking back, these engagements foreshadowed the future of mechanized warfare. The principle remains: information is force. A smaller, well-coordinated unit can outmaneuver and outfight a superior but disjointed opponent. For historians, the Normandy Shermans are a reminder that innovation often lies not in the most glamorous or powerful weapon, but in the integration of technology, doctrine, and human initiative. The German crew's humiliation was swift, but the lesson was enduring. Their mockery of the Sherman became a testament to human misjudgment and the cost of underestimating an unseen advantage. In the quiet aftermath of Normandy, among the mud, hedgerows, and shattered armor, one truth stood clear: the Shermans' radios did more than communicate, they redefined the rules of armored warfare. The war had taught a simple but timeless lesson: coordination. Intelligence and adaptability often outweigh raw strength, and those who laugh first may be the ones who fall first.